Today we will be discussing the fourth pramana of Nyaya philosophy, it is known as Shabda or verbal testimony. As you know, Nyaya philosophy speaks about four pramana. Pramana for means the methods of valid knowledge or the valid source of knowledge, known as pramana. They said that verbal testimony or Shabda is the fourth pramana based on which any knowledge that we gain will be turned into prama or valid knowledge. Nyaya said there are four types of pramana. One is perception or pratyaksha, the second one is inference or anumana, the third one is comparison or upamana, and the fourth one which we will be going to discuss today is verbal testimony or Shabda. That means how a Shabda can become a sources of valid knowledge. We hear many words from others, even we read many of the text, and also we accumulate some knowledge based on our understanding. Here question arises, how do we know that which interpretation or which word gives us the correct knowledge or the valid knowledge of an object? As you know, Nyaya philosophy speaks about knowledge, and for them knowledge corresponds to an object, knowledge stands for an object. Therefore, they say that in Shabda, what are the interpretations or what are the speaker's utterances gives us to accumulate the prama or valid knowledge? Is it possible that after reading a text we could be able to identify an object correctly, exactly? Is it possible for a cognizer to cognize an object with its true nature without any deviation which he or she known from the interpreter who interpreted about that fact or by reading the text? So, therefore, all these questions will be discussed in today's class, and we will see that how Nyaya argues that verbal testimony or Shabda can be considered as an independent source of valid knowledge like perception, inference and comparison, and how this verbal testimony cannot be reduced to any other kind of pramana. So, today class we will be discussing all in details in Nyaya position. Shabda or verbal testimony, according to Indian logicians, Nyaya are told or considered as Indian logicians, because whatever they argue based on three aspects. One is psychological, second one is logical, and third one is philosophical. Now, this argument they are saying that verbal testimony or Shabda is one among the other independent pramana to accumulate the prama in case of a cognizer. Here he is saying that the Shabda is the knowledge of objects derived from words or sentences. First, you understand what Shabda means. Any kind of vibration in the air, you listen some sounds, you hear some sounds. Ordinarily, people understood this is Shabda. Shabda means somebody uttered something and you hear that and you understand what the person is speaking about. If you can do so, then any knowledge that you gain, that will be known as Shabda. Or here Shabda will play a pramana to accumulate a knowledge known as prama. I repeat, if somebody said something on a certain issue, certain fact or a certain event, and you could able to understand what he or she said in the true spirit as he or she said, then the knowledge that you gain will be known as prama, and you will gain the knowledge through the means called Shabda. So, therefore, they said Shabda is an independent source of valid knowledge as like inference, perception and upamana. Further, they said, but all verbal knowledge, whatever we hear from others, cannot be considered as a verbal knowledge. Whatever we hear from others on a fact or an issue or an event cannot be considered as a valid knowledge. There are many times, suppose you are going to an unknown place, you will ask some person, can you tell me this hotel where it is located or this road where it will go? There are every chances that that person, whatever he or she will be guiding you, you may not accept that, because you think that due to some or other reason whatever he has told he may not be experienced on that, or whatever he has guided you, this may not be the correct guidance. Therefore, you seek some other person's guidance about your path, that how you have to go to a particular place. Now, the question arises, why it is the case that you believe one person, you consider one person as a trustworthy person and you do not consider the other person as a trustworthy person? What happens to a cognizer? As a result, the cognizer distinguishes the two persons who is reliable and who will be not reliable in reference to his questions regarding how to go to a particular place. So, therefore, they said that all verbal testimony that we hear from others cannot be considered as a verbal testimony or sabda. But further they said that some of the interpreter, if they will speak on a certain issue and will consider as a trustworthy person or reliable person, then whatever they utter, if we understand as a cognizer and able to cognize the object on which the interpreter speaks about, then the knowledge that we gain is known as valid knowledge, and the means through which we gain the knowledge is known as sabda. Now, therefore, they said sabda is a pramana of valid verbal testimony. Now, Nyaya explains this, how sabda can become a valid verbal testimony. They have given a sloka. They said that apta upadesha sabda, they have defined in the Sanskrit apta upadesha sabda. You find this sloka in Nyaya Sutra 1.1.7. To define sabda, they said that apta upadesha sabda, apta means the person who is experienced on that, whatever he will or she will express or guided to the cognizer, that will be known as sabda. Apta means the person who is experienced on it, and upadesha, upadesha means suggestions or guidance. So, the person who has experienced on a fact, or he or she does not have any disputes with the cognizer, then whatever he or she interprets about that cognition, the cognizer will be consider that utterances and understand these words, the meaning of the words, and find out what they speak on a particular object. If this is so, then the knowledge that cognizer will be achieved or attained will be considered as a prama, and this is possible only through the pramana. Therefore, say that apta upadesha sabda, any kind of suggestion you have received from an experienced person on a particular object will be known as sabda. Now, further they said that sabda therefore is the direction or instruction of a reliable person. Who is a reliable person? Now, question comes, who is a reliable person? Can we rely each and every individual whenever we seek for a particular information? Here Nyaya said that we cannot rely on each and every individuals on a particular issue. We cannot ask each and every individual for a particular query. So, therefore, a cognizer is a rational one to find out who will be the trustworthy person or who will be the reliable person to express his or her view towards a particular object on which the cognizer wishes or desires to cognize. Therefore, they said that all verbal testimony cannot be considered as a valid verbal testimony. Further, they said that even all persons cannot be considered as a reliable person. Now, the question arises in your mind probably, who is the reliable person and how a cognizer has to identify who is the reliable person. Now, this question also answered by Nyaya philosophy. They said that sabda is the instructive assertion of a reliable person. Now, we will see that who is the reliable person and how a cognizer has to decide who can be a reliable person. It said that a reliable person may be anyone, may be a Rusi, may be a Mlecha, may be a Arya, may be anyone who is an expert in a certain matter, is willing to communicate his or her experience to it. So, it said that any person living in this earth can be a reliable person. However, that person has experience on that object on which the cognizer is seeking knowledge, and further the person has an urge to communicate his or her experiences to the cognizer. In addition to that, the cognizer and the person who will be sharing his or her experiences on a particular object should not have any disputes in any matter in the previously. So, with these three conditions, you consider who would be a reliable person. I said the first thing is that a reliable person is one who has experience on a particular object and willing to communicate that experience to the cognizer who is seeking the knowledge for a cognition. The second, the cognizer and the person who will be sharing his or her experience on a particular object should not have any kind of disputes in any situation. The third thing, that on the basis of the rational attitude, the cognizer identify this person will be a reliable person because he is willing to communicate his or her experience on that object on which he is seeking for. Now, I will give an example so that it will help you to understand what is Shabda means and how a cognizer will be identify who will be a reliable person. Assume a situation where a person reached to a bank of river. From there he finds three persons. One is a fisherman, another is a person who will be riding bicycle, and another person sitting over there with all dress code and enjoying the nature of river or the beauty of river. Here you find the purpose of the cognizer to cross the river from one side to other side. Now, he finds three persons, one is the fisherman, another individual who will be riding the bicycle, the another person who is sitting over there on a cement bench and enjoying the beauty of river. Now, immediately he finds that the reliable person is a fisherman, because the fisherman will be a native over there and desire to communicate his or her experience about the depth and the width of the river and also the depth of the water in that river, and which direction the cognizer should go. As a result, the cognizer should not find any kind of problem to cross the river. Now, how it is possible? It is possible because the cognizer finds out that in case of other two, though they appears to be localized, however, certainly they may not have a exact or more experience on that river. However, the fisherman has every time has a duty to catch the fish over there. Therefore, he will be knowing that in which side the water will be high and which side the depth of the water will be low. Therefore, it is based on the rational attitude of the cognizer identify who is the reliable person, and after identifying the fisherman to be a reliable person, find that he has no disputes with that person in earlier cases, and also find that the fisherman willing to communicate his or her experiences to the cognizer for crossing the river. Therefore, in this case you can find out the utterances made by the fisherman on the cognition that how to cross a river will be considered as Shabda, because here the reliable person is the fisherman and the cognizer wishes to know about the river and how to cross the river, and here whatever the fisherman said about the river and the water of the river, all these things will be considered as a Shabda. And based on that all these utterances, now the cognizer try to move inside the river and recollecting all the utterances made by the fisherman, that how to cross the river and which direction he is to walk down in the river. Now, I hope you have understood who would be a reliable person and how a cognizer has to decide what is the reliable person and who is the person, and whatever his or her utterances, how a cognizer will be considered as a Shabda for identifying a knowledge on a particular object. Now, here is said that the Shabda made by the fisherman will be considered and understood by the cognizer. Each word made by the fisherman or the spoken by the fisherman understood by the cognizer, because the cognizer understand each meaning of that word delivered by the fisherman. Here meaning and word are related with each other. You can find that if the fisherman will be speaking in his or her native language and the cognizer will be as a foreigner not able to understand what he or speaks, then the utterances made by the fisherman cannot be considered as a Shabda over here. Now we will see Shabda for them, what are the things they include. Verbal testimony includes both utterances as well as text. For example, in Bhagavad Gita, in the Bhagavad Gita or Mahabharata, whatever we read, based on that we gain some knowledge, and here it is also considered as a verbal testimony, because here we perceive something and we get the knowledge of this thing, and this is also considered as a kind of verbal testimony. So, verbal testimony includes both text as well as speech, both utterances as well as written sentences. Now, what they said, Shabda as a source of valid knowledge consists in understanding the meaning of the statements of a trustworthy person. I repeat, they said that Shabda is a source of valid knowledge, consists in understanding the meaning of the statement made by the trustworthy person. That means, whatever the fisherman said about the river, this will be considered as a Shabda for the cognizer, and this is the means through which he will gain the knowledge how to cross the river. Therefore, Shabda is considered as an independent source of valid knowledge like perception, inference and upamana. In other words, they said that it consists in understanding the meaning of the words and sentences emanated from the trustworthy person. Why I have used the word emanated? Because there are many situations, many cases where the experienced person will be speaking about something new on a fact which is not known to the cognizer. For example, about some new discovery, about some new invention. There, if the experienced person or the reliable person will be able to communicate his or her experience on that, then in this case he or she, whatever he or she uttered about that experiences is emanated. That means, newly he talked about that issues, and based on the Shabda, the cognizer will gain some knowledge. Therefore, I made it very clear. Shabda consists in understanding the meaning of the words and sentences emanated from the trustworthy person. Now, continuing further, there are three criterions of Shabda. On fulfilling those, it is regarded as pramana. Like in other sources of valid knowledge, you find that there are steps involved. For example, in upamana you find few steps involved. In inference you find few steps are involved. In the similar way, you find in case of Shabda or verbal testimony also few steps involved. Now, what are these steps? I have already given in the form of example, but however, I will be repeating it further in a different form. Same thing. The first step would be the statement made by a reliable person. Here, the cognizer has an urge to know on a certain object. Therefore, he seeks for a person who experienced on that object and willing to share of that object. Therefore, they said that in the first step, the statement made by a reliable person. It may be a spoken sentence which will be known through the auditory perception, or it may be written sentences which will be knowing through the visual perception. In case of visually challenged person, this may be a textual perception. So, all these things comes under the verbal testimony. In case of a visual challenged person, it is a textual perception, because he or she cannot see on that object, however can hear the sounds. Even if you hear the sounds, that is Shabda. If there is some written sentences, suppose you ask a person considering a reliable person and he or she has a willing to speak on a certain object, but however due to some or other reason he could not speak. If you will give also in a writing form about that object on which you are seeking for, then that also comes under as a verbal testimony. Now, this is the first step. The reliable person utters his or her experience on the particular object on which the cognizer is seeking the knowledge on it. The second step, associating understanding the meaning of the words or Shabda. There must be an understanding of meaning of the words perceived by us. What they mean here, Nyaya clearly said that in the second step, the cognizer must be able to understand the meaning of each word and sentences delivered or uttered by the reliable person. If he fails to understand at least few words or sentences, then the knowledge that will be gained cannot be considered as concrete knowledge, because he or she has missed out many of those component of the word uttered by the reliable person or the trustworthy person. Therefore, he is saying that it is equally important for the cognizer to understand the meaning of the word or sentences delivered by the trustworthy person in the particular context on which the cognizer is able to know on certain issues. The third step would be the cognizer gets the true knowledge about that object what he heard from the trustworthy person. While experiencing that object, while crossing the river, he recollect all the words and their meaning delivered by the fisherman and try to cross the river. And if this is so, the knowledge that he gained about the river and to cross the river is a prama, and the means through which he can attain that is known as sabda. Now, as you know, there are 3 steps, rigidly 3 steps involved. The first step is the reliable person who try to explain about that fact on which the cognizer seeks knowledge. The second step, the cognizer understand the words and sentences delivered by the reliable person. And the third, while doing that action or while attaining a cognition or achieving a particular cognition, he recollect all the information delivered by the trustworthy person, and as a result he has a true knowledge about that object or a valid knowledge about that object. So, in this way, if you find, then sabda will be treated as an independent pramana of valid knowledge. Now, continuing further, now the question arises, now there are 3 steps involved to consider sabda as a pramana and to have a valid knowledge by the help of sabda or verbal testimony. Now, question arises, which is the proximate cause or which is very important, without that the sabda cannot be considered as a valid pramana. Now, based on this question, Nyaya says that the knowledge of words will be the karana for having a verbal testimony as a pramana, and with the help of verbal testimony we can achieve a particular knowledge of an object or an issue or an event or a fact. What is the knowledge of words? That means the cognizer who is hearing the utterances from the fisherman must be able to understand each and every word or sentences delivered by the person, and while delivering the word or sentences to a cognizer, in other words, while sharing his or her experiences to the cognizer, the reliable person makes sure that whatever he or she delivers is it all the things communicable or communicate to the cognizer. So, henceforth you do not find a gap between what the reliable person communicated and what the cognizer has understood. What Nyaya is saying, that there must be a clear understanding by the cognizer what the interpreter or the reliable person stated about a particular object. So, therefore, knowledge of the words will be considered as a karana or the nimitta cause or the proximate cause, and without that any knowledge that a cognizer will attain cannot be considered as a valid knowledge through the help of verbal testimony. So, in this way you find Nyaya establish verbal testimony as an independent source of valid knowledge as well. Further, they said sabda is distinguished from other methods of valid knowledge, because sabda certainly cannot be deduced or reduced to any other kinds of valid knowledge or valid pramana. Why? Because they said in sabda we have knowledge due to words or sentences, whereas perceptual knowledge is due to sense object contacts with objects, inferential knowledge is due to vyapti relation, and upamana is due to the perception of similarity, dissimilarity and peculiar qualities. What they mean here is that in case of sabda and verbal testimony, the knowledge of the words is important for the cognizer. The cognizer must understand the words or sentences delivered by the reliable person. In other words, the reliable person also try to communicate a particular language by the help of words and sentences which will be understood by the cognizer. And this is certainly different from other kind of valid pramana known as perception. See, perception is a valid pramana, but in case of perception we perceive the objects, our sense organs contact to the object through our 5 sense organs, and as a result we accumulate or gain some knowledge. This is a perception, and certainly it is different from the verbal testimony. If you consider inference as an independent source of knowledge, there you find there is a Vyapti relation between Hetu and Sadhya. That means you are seeing a smoke on a distant place on a hill, then based on your previous experience that fire and smoke related or associated inseparably with each other, as a result you are claiming that now I am inferring there may be fire on the hill. So here you find that it is nothing to do with verbal testimony. Even in upamana or comparison, the cognizer attained knowledge because of some similarity, dissimilarity or peculiar qualities on the objects. And if you see all these three, verbal testimony is certainly a unique pramana to have an prama or to have a valid knowledge. The reason behind in verbal testimony, it is the word and sentences, and the meaning of the word and sentences plays a role for getting the true knowledge of an object or the valid knowledge of an object. Therefore, Nyaya said that like perception, inference and comparison, verbal testimony is an independent source of valid knowledge. Now, we will see how many types of sabda said by Nyayakas. Nyayakas say there are two types of sabda that we find. One is drushtartha, another is adrushtartha sabda, which is mentioned by Vatsyayana. Vatsyayana written his commentary on the Nyaya Sutra. So, according to Vatsyayana, you find sabda is divided into two types. One is drushtartha sabda, another is adrushtartha sabda. Further, Nyayakas divided sabda into two kinds. One is laukika sabda, another is alaukika sabda. Now we will see under which ground they have divided sabda to the drushtartha in one hand and adrushtartha in another hand. What they said, the first classification made by the Vatsyayana, drushtartha and adrushtartha, is based on the nature of objects of knowledge, and the second classification is made by the Navya. The first one made by the Vatsyayana and the second one made by the Navya. Now, considering the first distinction that how sabda can be divided into two types, one is drushtartha and adrushtartha. They said that a sabda which is perceptible is called drushtartha. In other words, sabda deals with perceptible objects is called drushtartha. If you say that my pen is blue, here we can identify the object pen and which color is blue. Therefore, it is a drushtartha. We as a cognizer can able to perceive that object, and therefore, this is also known as drushtartha. Verbal testimony here is find two types. One is drushtartha, another is adrushtartha. In case of drushtartha, the cognizer able to see the objects. But if I say charity is desirable, punctuality is desirable, honesty is desirable, if I say so, then neither you can perceive the honesty nor you can perceive the desirable as you perceive the pain. Therefore, he is saying that charity is desirable, we will understand the meaning of it. However, we cannot refer to an object saying that that is charity and this is honesty, because honesty and charity are concept, it does not denote to a particular object. Therefore, if in this sentence if we say that charity is desirable or God does not exist, then this will be called adrushtartha. The word here by the cognizer, though able to understand, but cannot refer to an object towards the empirical world. So, therefore, I have given an example saying that the table is rectangle, you can see that object, therefore, this is comes under drushtartha. But if I say that duty is God or charity is dharma, then it is adrushtartha. Here charity and dharma cannot be perceived like table and its rectangle. He is saying that sabda deals with imperceptible objects is called adrushtartha. In other words, a sabda which is not perceptible is known as adrushtartha. And this drushtartha and adrushtartha, this distinction is based on the nature of object of knowledge. Whatever we are speaking, what is the nature of that object, whether that is visible perceivable or not perceivable. We are talking about, say, a rose is beautiful flower. Here if I refer to the object rose, I can find out the object is available in the phenomenal world, and I can show that how beautiful it is. Therefore, I can say that this sentence comes under Dushtartha. If I say that a rose is red, if I say that a table is brown, so all this shabda comes under Dushtartha, because the cognizer is able to cognize that object through his or her perception. But if I say that charity is dharma, punctuality is desirable, in all these cases, though we can understand the meaning of the propositions, however, this consider under the Adrushtartha Sabda. So in this way, Vatsayana make a distinction that how we can find two kinds of Sabda under the verbal testimony. As I said, Drushtartha is limited to the objects of the world. Adrushtartha deals with supersensible realities, for example, vice, virtue, heaven, etc. That means we cannot refer to an object like vice, virtue and heaven. The second classification, that is Laukika Sabda and Alaukika Sabda. The two distinctions they made, which is based on the source of knowledge, in which source the verbal testimony comes from, Laukika and Alaukika. Laukika Sabda are those Sabda which is derived from the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, etc., the epic texture. And Alaukika Sabda are those Sabda which is made by the ordinary person as we are. Therefore, they said that Laukika Sabda are non-erroneous, because it is said by the God, or God has sent somebody to write this, all this script, ancient scripts having its own sanctity and dignity. This is non-erroneous. However, we as a human being, if we try to speak or analyze or explain on a particular object, there may be a situation we may be speaking wrongly. Whatever we deliver may be commit an error, we may commit an error. Therefore, they said that to err is the human. That means, since we are human, we are not perfect. However, the Gita and Bhagavad, all this, whatever the message they deliver, all are perfect. They are infallacious. So therefore, you find that Nabbenaya make a distinction saying that we have a Laukika Sabda, and in the other side we have a Alaukika Sabda, which made by the ordinary person as we are. What they said, Alaukika Sabda is known as divine or Vaidika, whereas Laukika Sabda is known as secular. The Vedas are spoken by God. The Vaidika testimony are divine, they are perfect and infallacious and even non-erroneous. However, Laukika testimony is spoken by the human being and liable to error. And here Nyaya is saying that though the human being, whatever they deliver on a particular issue, on his or her experiences, by gaining his or her experience on a particular object, still this may be liable to error, because he or she is a human being, and a human being having a limited knowledge cannot consider his or her knowledge will be a perfect knowledge or the knowledge. Here Nyaya is saying that if at all the person or the reliable person wishes to explain about the object on which he or she had experienced, then he or she may be considered as a reliable person without any ambiguity. Though there are chances he or she may not able to interpret or able to express about that object in its clear form, however, whatever he or she speaks on a particular situation will be considered as a verbal testimony for the cognizer. So this is the way they define that there are two types of Sabda we find, Laukika and Alaukika in one hand, which is based on the source of knowledge, from which source the verbal testimony comes from. In another case where Vatsayana find that there are two kinds of Sabda, one is Drushtartha, that is perceivable by the cognizer, and the other one is Adrushtartha, which is not perceivable by the cognizer, and this is based on the ground of the knowledge, whether the object, whether the explanation heard by the cognizer, whether it is perceivable or not. So in this way you find Sabda are divided into different kinds, and when they are divided, the distinction based on a particular grounds. Now we will be discussing on sentences. If you see that the first sentence I made, that a cognizer desires to have a knowledge on a particular object, and for that he finds out someone is a trustworthy or reliable person known as a fisherman in case of my example. Now the fisherman, whatever the sentences he uttered must understood by the cognizer, and the cognizer must also get each and every meaning of the words delivered by the fisherman. In other side, the fisherman will communicate through the language which is familiar to the cognizer. If this is so, then after understanding each meaning of the sentences delivered by the reliable person, a cognizer will do the same thing in accordance, and while doing the task, if he can retrieve all the information and doing accordingly, and last able to succeed that, and lastly able to cognize that object, then this knowledge will be turned to a valid knowledge or prama, and he gained that, he achieved that or attained that because of the means known as sabda. Now putting the emphasis on sabda here, they said that on sentences, if the sentences delivered by the reliable person which is not understood in clear form by the cognizer, then there is a gap. Here this is cannot be considered as a sabda. Therefore, considering that how a sentence can be meaningful and how the two persons can communicate with each other, so they have discussed on sentences, how a sentence will get meaningful and what are the criteria should be involved to derive the meaning of the proposition, and how to derive the meaning of a proposition, and after deriving, how you know that we have understood the proposition correctly. So these are the questions altogether Nyaya address to make his point very clear, what will be the sabda and how sabda becomes an independent source of valid pramana to have a pramana. They said that what is a sentence? They said that a sentence is a combination of one word or more than one word conveying a particular sense. This may be a logical sense, this may be empirical sense, any sense, but particular sense. If I say that the blue ground patch sleeps well, for you somehow you make a sense. However, you can say me that this sentence is not correct, this sentence is wrong sentence, because how come the blue patch sleeps well? Because blue patch not a life, is not a human being, not an animal. So therefore, this sentence for you is a meaningless sentence, though you understand some sort of meaning of it. Further, if I said that the golden mountain flies from north to south, then you say that how come the golden mountain, which is a rock, can fly? So therefore, some kind of incorrectness involved in that sentence to understand the correct meaning of that sentence. Now because of some ambiguity arises in our day to day ordinary language, therefore Nyaya said that we must speak about on sentences, how a sentence becomes meaningful sentence. If a sentence does not make any sense to the communicator, then the person who is communicating the sentence is wrong? Absolutely. For example, I do not know German. If I go to the country German and I will ask some persons, can you guide me how to go this place with the English, and if that person who is a reliable person and able to share his or her experience in a different language, say German language, and which is not known to me, then here the knowledge that I will gain whatever he or she delivers cannot be considered as a sabda or a valid testimony. Therefore, a sentence to be communicable when there is a commonality found between speaker and the listener is that the particular language and meaning of all the possible words that involved in the sentences to derive the meaning of the sentence. For example, if I say the cow is grazing the grass, here the cow grazing grass, all these words has a special contribution in that sentences to derive the meaning out of it. If I say the cow is grazing the sky in the sea, this sentence is meaningless for you, because each word, though they contribute, however, their contribution is not correct, and as a result this sentence is a meaningless sentence. But if you find that this is grammatically correct, because I am saying the cow is grazing the sky in the river, therefore you find grazing and sky cannot be attract with each other. Grazing can be related to the grass, grazing can be related to the leaf or some kind of things. And if you say that there is a leaf or a grass where there is an animal cow, then the grazing has to be expected, because you find that cow, grazing, grass, these three things to a compatibility. If there are three things are not there in a sentence, the sentence seems to be meaningless. So thus therefore they said that there are four conditions to be involved, four conditions to be satisfied to derive a meaningful sentences. And in case of Sabda, this is more crucial to have a meaningful sentences. If the meaning is not properly communicated between the cognizer and the reliable person, then there are every chances that the knowledge attained by the cognizer cannot be considered as a valid knowledge. Hence, now we will be discussing what are the criteria to be involved to get the meaning of a sentences in its true form. Now, the first sentence they said that any combination of words does not make a significant sentence, because I have given many examples which is clear to now that any kind of words that if you used in a sentence, certainly the sentence is not meaningful. If I say that, I am repeating, I am saying that the cow is grazing the sky on the sea. There are words, see, sea has a meaning, sky has a meaning, grazing has a meaning, cow has a meaning. However, if you put together in a sentence, this sentence does not make any sense, it does not convey anything about anything. Therefore, this sentence is judged as or considered as a meaningless sentence. First, they said that a sentence is a combination of one word or more than one word conveying a particular sense. And second point, they said that however, any combination of word does not convey a particular meaning of a sentence. Therefore, they said that there are four conditions to be satisfied to get the correct meaning of a sentence. The first one they said akanksha. The first one they said is known as akanksha. Akanksha means expectancy or mutual implication. What is expectancy? As I said the example, the cow is grazing the sky on the river. Here grazing and sky are not mutually implication with each other. Neither grazing seeks the sky nor the word sky require grazing with it. Therefore, these two words, though they have a different meaning altogether, however, they cannot convey a particular meaning in it. Therefore, the sentence is meaningless sentence for us. But if I say that the cow is grazing the grass in the field, then this sentence is a meaningless sentence for you, because here if you find grazing, grass and field and cow, these four are compatible with each other, each one expect other. So, it is a kind of mutual implication with other or expectancy. Here the cow is expect grazing, grazing is expecting grass, grass is expecting in the field, in vice versa. But if you put in any other kind of format, this will be a meaningless statement. If I say the cow is drinking ice cube, here ice cube and all these things, though they have a meaning, but the sentence itself does not have a self expectancy or a mutual implications with each other. Hence, the whole sentence is a meaningless sentence, though the each word have a particular sense out of it. So, this condition has to be understood while deriving the meaning of a proposition. Now, the second condition they said yogyata or compatibility or fitness. What is yogyata? Yogyata means in a sentence you use many words. He is saying that a sentence should not contradict in itself. For example, if I say that the fire generates coolness or the ice cube generate heatness, here the heatness and the coolness, here the fire cannot generate coolness. Therefore, here coolness and fire are contradicting with each other. As like if I say the table is not a table, here I am contradicting the sentences. In the same way, if I say that the ice cube generates the heat, here the heat and ice cube contradict with each other. But if I say that the ice cube generates cool, then the sentence is meaningful for you in our day to day language. Therefore, he is saying that compatibility or fitness is one of the conditions should be satisfied to derive the meaning of that proposition. And if we could not able to do that, that means the sentence will be meaningless. If I say that the sky is not a sky, the cow doesn't grudging is not a cow, that means the whole sentence is contradicting. Or if I say that the cow is grudging the iron rod, here iron rod cannot be grudging, it is a contradiction in terms. Therefore, he is saying that whenever we will frame a or constitute a sentence, it should not contradict in itself. So, the first condition, as I say, it is a mutual implication. One word expect another word which will be fitting nearer to it. This is called mutual implication or expectancy. The second one is compatibility or fitness. You cannot write any sentences which contradict itself. I cannot write a sentence saying that a triangle consists of 4 angles. If I say that a triangle consists of 4 angles, it deviates or violates the second rule known as yogyata or compatibility. If you see the third argument, in third argument they said that sanidhi or proximity. What they mean by sanidhi and proximity? In case of sanidhi, if I say how, after some time, say after 10 minutes if I say are, then after some time then I will utter the word say you. In a long gap, how, I will make some gap on it, then say are, then I will make some another gap, say you. If I utter this sentence is not meaningful for you. But if I say how are you in a particular beef, then this sentence is meaningful for you. In the same way, if we write the sentence, let us say, can I ask you something? Can, after that there is a gap for a long time, then I, after that there is a long gap, then ask, there is a long gap. If we write in that way, the whole sentence will be a meaningless sentence. So, this condition has to be satisfied to derive the meaning of a proposition. The last condition they said tatparya. Tatparya means intention and context. In our day to day language, there are many situations where we both of us know the context, the speaker as well as the interpreter. So, therefore, if a one sentence is delivered, though it has a literal meaning and a different meaning, however, we understand what the interpreter wants to talk about. For example, if I say that there is a bench made out of wood, the bench can tolerate only 5 people. That means, if 5 people can sit on that bench, the bench does not have any problem, it will not break down. But if there are 12 people who will sit on a bench, the bench will break down. Under this situation, I can say that the bench will be crying if 12 people will be sitting on it. Therefore, the context to whom I am delivering is known to both interpreter as well as the speaker. If this is the case, the context is known to both of them, then they can deliver any kind of sentence. For example, there is a particular word, say Saindhava. Saindhava stands for salt and Saindhava stands for horse. While eating in my dinner, if I say that bring the Saindhava, that means to whom I am addressing, he or she will be bringing certainly salt. But while I am standing in a field, if I say that bring the Saindhava so that I will go to other places, that means in that case certainly the person will not bring the salt, rather will bring the horse as such. Thus, you find that in our day to day language there are many words used ambiguously, or in other words there are many words has a multiple meaning. It is because of the context we understand what the speaker wants to speak about. So, therefore, I said here if we say that I have given an example, the ladder is crying, that means in a ladder 2 people can go off, but if more than 7 people will ride the ladder, then the ladder will break down. So, in this case instead of saying break down, I say the ladder is crying. Since the context is known to both me as well as to to whom I am addressing, therefore the sentence is meaningful sentences. So therefore they say that these 4 conditions, akanksha, yogyata, sanidhya and tatparya, has to be satisfied to derive the meaning of a propositions. And if these are the contexts are involved, when the reliable person speaks to the cognizer and the cognizer able to understand it, then the sentence will be meaningful sentence. I hope now it is understood to you what Nyaya mean by Shabda. Thank you so much.